Hello everyone! Last time I talked about Pocket Mirror, a game made by 5 people with a little bit of help from anyone else who wanted to join. Despite it being the developer's first attempt at a video game, it was really good for something that was made for free for fun. So then, what happens if you took those same people and gave them publisher funding to make a bigger game? Little Goody Two Shoes is the reason I decided to make videos about every Astral Shift game, which so far is just 2. Those brief moments in Pocket Mirror where a carefully crafted image fills the screen is now the entire game. There are like 4 different parts where the game cuts to fully animated musical numbers that frequently shift between mediums. They went from using repetitive copy-pasted RPG Maker tiles to backgrounds so detailed they make actual landscapes look boring. You could take a screenshot of any room in this game and there would always be something to look at. They even managed to improve the gameplay to make it challenging without relying on chase sequences or puzzles that instantly kill you for choosing incorrectly. However, there is one aspect of Little Goody Two Shoes that could be considered a downgrade, and that's the horror. Pocket Mirror was a game so edgy that the developers had to add a mature content warning on its Steam page, something that is noticeably missing on the game's sequel. The ESRB says Little Goody Two Shoes can be played by 12-year-olds, which is not exactly the demographic you think of when you imagine a scary horror game. And for most of the game, maybe this is true, except for that one part. If you've played the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. A moment so messed up it could only be experienced through the medium of a video game. And to reach that part, I have to go over everything this game does perfectly to make this single moment work so well. In Little Goody Two Shoes, you play as Elise, a woman who works as the local town maid and wants nothing more than to leave said town in favor of a richer life where she isn't at the bottom of the social ladder. She outwardly wishes to be rich right at the beginning of the game. It's a very selfish desire, but one that makes perfect sense when you're confronted with the people she works for. Right after this speech, you bump into the local patrol and they are all weirdly scornful if not outright suspicious of you. After explaining that the reason you're walking home at night is because you had to work late in town, they tell you, "You know better than to put yourself in danger, Elise." As if it's somehow your fault you're working late at night. Oh, but this is just some random one-off interaction I'm making too big of a deal of, right? Or is this what the entire game is like? On the morning of the next day, heading into the town of Kieferberg reveals just how dysfunctional this place is. Even before entering the town center, there are countless abandoned buildings overgrown and taken by the forest. The houses inside the town are even less populated, with some of them having visible damage on their exterior. The villagers, while physically well put together, show signs of mental disrepair. In the town center you can find people either arguing about leaving Kieferberg or are trying to convince others that the recent windstorm was actually caused by the woodland witch who is out to get them. Yeah, I mean, the declining state of these guys is very palpable. They would sooner blame an imaginary target than tackle the real issues plaguing the town, and there is no better person to blame for their problems than Elise. Although it's never stated explicitly, at least in the beginning portion of the game, Elise is constantly suspected by those older than her. The morning after coming home late, the news that you were outside at night becomes public gossip, speculation as to what nefarious things you might have been up to. "It has come to my attention, you left home rather late. You work in the church, how do you know this?" On the same day, the villagers criticize Elise for working on a Sunday, while others accuse her of doing or knowing something that she shouldn't, in a sort of not really accusing you of anything, but also you did something evil, I can tell. Not every single person in Kieferberg acts like this, but the more time you spend here, the more these types of messages add up, causing you to feel like an outsider. And in many ways, Elise is an outsider. If we go by the intro storybook, she wasn't born in Kieferberg. She was found by some random woman sitting there in a basket, completely unrelated to anyone actually living in the town. If we look at it geographically, Elise lives in a house deep inside the woods, far outside the rest of society. She fundamentally does not live in the same place as everyone else, and the game wants you to internalize that difference. There's this small barren trail in between Elise's house and where everyone else lives. It only takes roughly 30 seconds to cross, but that's 30 seconds where absolutely nothing happens. The developers purposefully left this part in to make you feel like you do not belong with everyone else. Every time you cross this short gap, you have to watch as the houses of Kieferberg slowly disappear into trees until all that's left is your secluded part of the world. However, nowhere is this gap between the townsfolk more apparent than in Elise's ideological differences. Elise is the only one in Kieferberg who isn't enamored with the town's former glory. Elise is the only one in Kieferberg who doesn't believe in God. When talking to the other women in town, she is the only one there who shows no interest in pursuing a husband. Well, okay, that's kind of a lie, because Freya here also doesn't show interest in men, but that's because she's gay, and so are you. And if you're smart like me, you'll date her and succeed at the risk of becoming even more different to the rest of the townsfolk. I mean, considering how gay people were treated in the past, I don't think an 18th century highly Christian German town is going to be appreciative of two girls kissing each other. Elise is also one of the few people in town who isn't superstitious and doesn't believe in the witch. Her viewpoints constantly challenge everyone else in this town, and you can definitely make the argument that this aspect of her scares the locals. There's an interesting comparison you can make between the protagonist of Little Goody Two-Shoes and the one in Pocket Mirror. In the latter, the protagonist is a little girl who naively obeys the orders of everyone she meets, too afraid to speak up against a painting with obvious malicious intentions. She is so spineless that you might as well be playing as a plushie in disguise. Virtually everyone you meet in this game walks all over you, and until the end that never changes. Elise is the total opposite. She frequently pushes back against the townsfolk harassment, questioning their hypocritical statements while refusing to accept their firmly held superstitions. In some instances, she even tells the old people to go off themselves when they really piss her off. Elise is ruthlessly unafraid to speak her mind, even if it gets her in trouble, and it is this aspect of her character that really makes Elise a target throughout the course of Little Goody Two-Shoes. If she just kept her head down like the protagonist of Pocket Mirror, then maybe the rest of the game wouldn't be so difficult. But because Elise stands up for what she believes in, it makes it really hard for the rest of the cast to empathize with her when the town truly starts falling apart. Suspicion is Little Goody Two-Shoes' most interesting mechanic by far. While the game features more traditional meters such as health, hunger, sanity, or even the lesbian dating bar, the suspicion meter is less obvious in how it works. Occasionally, when conversing with the townsfolk, you'll be given two options on what to say. One of the options increases suspicion, while the other one lowers it. Generally speaking, the options where Elise stands up for herself are the ones that increase suspicion, while the more passive ones lower it. This weirdly makes you play in a way that's kind of contradictory to Elise's character, where you focus more on being nice and agreeable instead of pointing out the ridiculousness of people's actions. It is not the only way to gain suspicion though. Sometimes these interactions are totally optional, while other times the villagers will go out of their way to question you while leaving town at night. One of the children even blackmails you for food, which if you try to ignore leads to a further increase in suspicion. The existence of this mechanic implies that Elise is hiding something from the townsfolk. What else could you be getting blackmailed for? And that's because she is hiding something. Back in the first night of Little Goody Two-Shoes, you meet a wandering traveler by the name of Rosemarine, who wears this suspiciously shaped witch's hat, but we're not talking about that. Rosemarine ends up staying with Elise for a whole week, and she becomes your consultant for all things supernatural, including how to contact the mysterious forest spirit only ever referred to as him, into granting Elise the fortune she desires. This becomes the other half of Little Goody Two-Shoes. During the night you enter the woods partaking in dangerous rituals while avoiding supernatural monsters. And during the day you work to get yourself fed, gathering as little suspicion as possible to make it to the end of the week. What makes this difficult is that your woodland adventures clearly have a negative impact on the livelihoods of Kieferberg, either by draining the town's water supply, causing horses to disappear, or by possessing children and making them wander off into the woods. Kieferberg in turn becomes a lot less safe as the townfolk slowly become more desperate to find the culprit responsible. While Elise never actively causes any of these events, they are still obviously side effects of her journey to become rich. Even if I technically didn't make the horses disappear, I still felt responsible. Especially when I entered town the next day and learned of yet another catastrophe that occurred overnight. Probably due to my actions. From how much misfortune we bring to town, it would be entirely justifiable to say that in Little Goody Two-Shoes, you play as the villain of the story. No heroic character would sacrifice so much of Kieferberg for their own selfish gain. What's fascinating about this struggle is that somehow, the game manages to make me sympathize with Elise more than the rest of the town. This is partly because Elise is the protagonist, so obviously you see everything from her perspective. But also, when you have to physically play through her everyday life in Kieferberg and experience what it's like to be constantly questioned for just trying to earn a normal living, even before you start scheming, it becomes difficult to care about these people. In this sense, Elise's actions could be justified as a form of vengeance against the people who treat her as this lower-class citizen. She isn't going out of her way to hurt anyone, but if any of her actions lead to the town's downfall, they kind of deserved it anyway. What adds an interesting layer to all of this is that the player knows how the story ends. Sort of. Throughout your journey, you will encounter these golden souls of his past clients. Although only speaking for brief moments, they always have just enough time to warn you of your inevitable fate should you continue working with him. From their dialogue you get some really heartbreaking stories of regret. These people were once on the same path you are on right now before getting damned to whatever eternity they are suffering through. Their only goal is to warn you against doing the same. Somewhat unexpectedly though, not all of the Golden Maidens regret their deal with him. In fact, some leave quite the positive review. He truly is quite merciful despite everything. Your wish is in good hands and so was ours. Yet don't forget you'll be sharing our fate if you betray him. The more you talk to the Golden Maidens, the more it seems like it's their fault for ending up like this. One claims to have almost reached her wish if she didn't change her mind last second. I faltered in my resolve, in my determination, if only I had taken that last step. When I was in my first playthrough, I took this to mean that I would have to make some sort of difficult choice at the end of the game. However, as long as I stuck to his path, never questioning it, I would receive the good ending. As long as I take that last step, then I will win the game. So that's what I did. I sunk to absolute rock bottom morally, doing everything in my power to continue ruining the livelihoods of the villagers in favor of becoming filthy rich. I mean, besides, everyone already suspects me of wrongdoing. I might as well become the witch Kieferberg is afraid of. Little did I know just how much I was being manipulated into thinking like this. It is at this point in the video that I have to warn you that this is where we enter spoiler territory. So if Little Goody Two-Shoes sounds at all interesting by now, then you should absolutely go buy it. It's practically on every platform available, and even as a demo, which is something most games these days don't have. Link to the Steam page is in the description. You have been warned. There's a hidden Easter egg you can find on your final day in Kieferberg. It's something that on the surface seems minor, but it completely recontextualizes every previous event in Little Goody Two-Shoes. I didn't even realize the implications of this reveal until months after finishing the game. Elise is not the villain of Little Goody Two-Shoes. Before joining the festival, you can enter the church, where a previously locked door is now open. Entering this door leads you to Father Hans' study, where reading his diary shatters my previous perspective of the game. Summoning Walpurga comes with its consequences. Eugen's horses, Lisbeth's lad, and even their goats, Elise herself. Every event that terrorized Kieferberg this week had absolutely nothing to do with Elise and the him side quest. It was the work of the local priest and his many rituals you can find hidden in the landscape of Kieferberg. He is the one responsible for summoning the witch that terrorized the town. It's crazy just how much this changes how I think about the story. What I thought was a simple fairy tale about the dark pathways of greed turned out to be a game that manages to make the player suspect themselves for things that have nothing to do with them. I have played many games where the hero player character is revealed to be the bad guy. I have never played a game where the villainous protagonist was secretly innocent. Remember the suspicion meter? The suspicion meter revolves around Elise secretly destroying the town, or at least doing something nefarious, hence why you must prevent anyone from finding out about your nightly endeavors. But if Elise isn't guilty of anything, then what the hell am I being suspected of? Obviously, at a meta-narrative level, they are suspecting you of being lesbian. Your romantic progress is constantly related to the suspicion meter, either because both mechanics are introduced at the same time, or because your relationships are all hidden inside this locket, located in the same place as the suspicion meter. But I'm talking in a literal sense. What is Elise actually being suspected of? Because if the side quest has nothing to do with the town's downfall, then the only person who ever gets hurt in that scenario is Elise. And if she isn't the Witch of Kieferberg, then that means every single thing you get suspected of has no bearing on the town and is instead a mere coincidence. Here's where little Goody Two-Shoes does something really cool. On my first playthrough, because I thought I was guilty for everything, there was so many events that looked incredibly suspicious. However, when I played through the game again with this newfound perspective, I realized how much of them may have been entirely in my head. Here's a perfect example of what I mean. During the afternoon of Monday, you get what might be the greatest jump scare in the entire game. One of the things you must hide from Kieferberg is the existence of Rosemarine, as she is a complete stranger to both the town and the protagonist. She holds esoteric knowledge about him, and maybe we shouldn't associate with the person who dresses like a witch in a place as paranoid as Kieferberg. The plan then becomes Rosemarine stays at home away from the rest of society, while Elise does literally everything else. To avoid having your plan exposed, it seems reasonable that this is how the rest of the game would play out. So imagine my shock when in not even the second day you are informed that Rosemarine has just entered town and is calling your name. Yeah, that was just about my reaction as well. What the hell are you doing here? Are you stupid? Elise has the exact same reaction as the player in this scenario and afterwards basically calls her a moron. But it's impressive how well the game puts you in her shoes, making you think exactly like her, especially when Elise's thought process is completely illogical. What exactly is wrong with this scenario and how does it make Rosemarine stupid? If she was looking for Elise but couldn't find her, asking about town would be the most logical move, yet it's framed as some sort of social blunder. Rosemarine is not the witch, there is nothing you can suspect her of. She is just some random traveler who happened to enter Kieferberg and meet Elise. So why are we going through all this effort to pretend she doesn't exist? Of course, I'm leaving out the psychotic love plot where Rosemarine was convinced that you are her lover even before ever meeting you due to some random star pattern but that still doesn't make her guilty. If anything, Kieferberg would be happy that this random stranger decided to travel all the way to this dying town. Yet instead of telling the truth, you must construct this intricate lie of who Rosemarine actually is and why you know her. A story that makes you more suspicious if it isn't consistent, making me wonder why we're even telling this lie in the first place. Well, I do know why we're telling this lie. Even if technically there's nothing wrong with being truthful, the townsfolk aren't just going to accept that. If you told them Rosemarine was some random traveler you met, which is the truth, I don't think they would take that very well. If she already gets a lot of skeptical glares towards the end of the game, I wonder how much worse it would be had you told them the truth. So even though there's nothing inherently wrong with meeting Rosemarine, you must still lie about her identity to protect yourself from being labeled as a witch. It isn't your fault you have to act this way, it's the town's fault for being overly suspicious of its residents. But then, why are the people of Kieferberg like this? There are many factors contributing to this, but ultimately it comes down to one answer. Unlike Elise, a large portion of Kieferberg's population is very passive, conforming to the beliefs of whoever's the loudest in the room. This is not all the characters, of course. Part of the reason you even survive certain events is because Elise always has friends who stand up for her innocence, even in the most incriminating situations. But those characters are in the minority, and even they feel like they must conform to the expectations of others in one way or another. The other villagers are even less capable of standing their own ground. Most of them aren't bad people on their own, but when forced to give an answer they would rather stay silent and join the crowd instead of standing up for what's right. Mariel, for example, is probably the most reasonable old person in town. At no point in the game does she accuse Elise of any wrongdoing, nor does she give credence to the town's rapidly growing witch accusations. In general, Marielle is one of the more pleasant characters you can talk to. And yet, in every major event where old Jochen oversteps his boundary and falsely accuses you, Marielle does nothing to support you. There is an astounding number of villagers who could be described as this. They're nice people, sure, but every single time Elise gets accused of some serious crime in front of the group, no one stands up for her, even though she's innocent. Shockingly, these same villagers know what they are doing is wrong, yet are helpless to change it. When you talk to them afterwards in a one-to-one conversation, suddenly they show so much support for you. I can assure you not one soul in Kieferberg thinks ill of you. But when it comes to saying something at a time it actually matters, it seems like suddenly everyone thinks ill of you. I'm ashamed of myself. I couldn't bring myself to speak up for you. I was caught up in the uproar, Elise. Not everyone agrees with what happened today, lass. Yeah, if only you said something about it. Kieferberg isn't the place to raise our children, Elise. I'm going to gobble up your baby. It's a special type of hell. Most of Kieferberg's residents individually are nice people, so you can't blame any one person for the treatment you receive from the collective. Yet when they are placed in a group, whatever benevolence they had is replaced with anger and fear, looking for the nearest person to blame, regardless of if they are actually guilty or not. This is brought to its extreme on the penultimate day. Elise is trapped in a church filled with every single person in Kieferberg, except something's changed. The friendly faces from before are replaced with hostile ones, each one in perfect agreement with the other, a group wanting justice so badly that it's already convinced you are the culprit. Now Elise is placed in a horrifying situation where she must answer for the crimes she didn't commit. Except, this is not the scariest part of Little Goody Two-Shoes. The scariest moment happens right at the end of the game, when the roles are reversed and you get put in their position. On my first playthrough, I didn't bother investigating all the Father Hand stuff, so I was still under the impression that I was somehow behind all the goings-on in Kieferberg. The town constantly looking at me weirdly was more than enough to convince me that I was a terrible person, and the way the Golden Maiden spoke about me made me convinced I was doomed to fail. Regardless, I stayed determined to follow his word as closely as possible, as I had previously been warned not to stray from my destined path. So when I reached the famed hollowed tree that would lead me to him, despite getting 2 opportunities to leave, I chose to continue. Even though I could kind of tell where this was all going, nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. Normally, portrayals of hell in video games tend to be somewhat cartoony, but this one was just unsettling. After walking through multiple gauntlets of pain, I reach this. While the rest of Little Goody Two-Shoes may contain spooky areas with supernatural monsters, they aren't as much scary as they are horror themed. But when I got to this part, I just felt like I entered somewhere that I shouldn't be. There's a weirdly detailed wasteland in the distance, almost like it's a photograph of a real place. Overlaying it all is this mural of several people worshipping what looks like the devil. All the while this creepy ambience plays in the background. The words foreboding and eerie could be used to describe this room, but neither accurately express how much evil emanates from this hallway. I would say it's unfitting for a game made for 12-year-olds to have a room like this, but at the same time I kind of did this to myself. So despite feeling like I made a mistake coming here, I continued. And let me tell you, it does not get any easier, as I walked across platforms and platforms, surrounded by petrified corpses of people desperately trying to escape the fire and climb to where I was. And yet, this is still not the scariest part of Little Goody Two-Shoes. At the top of the plateau, you meet the game's big bad, who in a sickening animation reveals himself to be called Ozzy. They called him Ozzy. They gave the main villain of both of their games the least intimidating name, but anyway, after confessing all her wants and desires to Ozzy, the game reveals the price of this deal. Your lover. Ozzy begins murdering whoever you sacrificed, not quickly but slowly, tearing off their every limb all in front of your eyes. We don't get to see the gory scene, but we do get to see Elise's reaction to it. And this is where the game does something really interesting. It gives you a choice. It asks you whether you want to stay silent or stand up for your lover. And I have to be honest, this prompt completely stumped me. On one hand, choosing to stand up for her is obviously the right choice. I'm not sure I would be able to live with myself if I let Freya die like that. But every time I thought about choosing the morally correct choice, part of my brain would bring up a certain line of dialogue from earlier. This is the last step that Soul was warning me about. If I stopped the arrangement here, I knew I would end up just like her. So against my better judgment, I chose to stay silent and accept my fate. Or well, hers. Besides, I'm going for all the endings anyway, I might as well start off with the bad one. But then something unexpected happened. It gave me the same option again. I had already made my choice, I thought the hard part was over, but here it is again. I can't lie to you, somehow choosing the same option again was harder than doing it the first time. But eventually, using the same logic as before, I chose to stay silent. But when I did that, Elise insisted she can still change this and gives me the option again. The game is looking me straight in the face and asking me if I'm sure I want to do this. And I chose, no, there's no way standing up to him would do anything anyway, right? I watch as the strongest woman in Kieferberg gets reduced to a clueless child wailing for her father as she is mauled to death by demons out of her control. And yet, I can still stop it. Even though there's blood now, the option comes up again and I'm still unsure if I want to be the bad guy. But yet again, after much thought, I had to take that last step. It is safer to be passive than to be confrontational. Now on the verge of death, the game gives me the same option again, as if it's begging me to change my mind. I have been given every opportunity to speak up, and once again, I chose to stay silent. That is the scariest part of Little Goody Two-Shoes. Predictably, Elise gets all the wealth she ever wanted and still feels miserable. I shared that feeling, but for somewhat different reasons. I didn't realize why until I reloaded the save and went for the good ending, not stepping anywhere near that cursed tree and leaving immediately. Despite the final scenes being everything you could ask for in a good ending, I felt empty. I was still thinking about what I had done earlier, and it is only while writing this script that I realize why. Throughout the game, both the player and Elise are critical of the two-faced villagers. They cannot for the life of them stand up to authority, even when someone's innocent life is on the line. But had I not just done the exact same thing? I had several chances to speak up for the person I claimed to have loved the entire game, but when it came to the moment that mattered, just like the villagers, I sat comfortably in the safety of silence. I was no different, and the game had just proven that to me without even removing my freedom of choice. I had done this to myself. Of course, choosing to speak up in this moment leads to you getting killed in place of your beloved, which leads to a game over. So I was right in thinking it was a doomed idea, just like the Golden Maiden warned me. But still, the exact logistics of the ending don't matter, because at the end of the day, the game gave me several chances to speak up for someone about to die, and I didn't take them. I was too preoccupied believing I was doomed to be the bad guy that I never realized I had the capacity to change. That is what Little Goody Two-Shoes had just proven to me. If I was in the townsfolk's shoes, I would probably be no different to them. And more than anything else that happens in the game, that is terrifying.